that they ought to stay out in the wilds of the Icelands, nursing their frozen hearts and casting their evil spells. Felix had taken those letters and tossed them straight onto the fire, telling her to pay them no heed, and that everything would die down soon enough. But Stella still felt a cold little stone of worry about it, right in the pit of her stomach. She was distracted from her concerns when her pet polar bear, Gruff, came lumbering over to her across the snowy lawn. Felix had rescued Gruff from the snow just like he'd rescued Stella, and the great white bear had been her best friend for as long as she could remember. Visitors to the house were often startled by his enormous size, especially when he stood up on his back legs, which he did whenever he really wanted to show off and look fantastically handsome. He stood more than 10 feet high, towering over even the tallest man. He'd done this the first time he'd ever met Aunt Agatha, Felix's overbearing bossy sister, who had let out the most terrible shriek, and then fainted, dead away in a cloud of petticoats and perfume. Stella had thought the screaming and fainting was terribly rude, especially as Felix had smartened Gruff up with a very fetching bow tie he'd had specially made for the occasion. Gruff shoved his black nose into the pockets of Stella's cloak in search of his favourite fish biscuits. She gave him a gentle shove and told him to sit. He flumped down obediently in the snow, and Stella rewarded him by tossing him a treat. The bear crunched it up happily, spraying crumbs everywhere, then licked Stella's cheek before lumbering off towards the lake. Felix had told Stella once that polar bears were very fast runners and could reach top speeds of 25 miles an hour, but Stella had never seen Gruff move any faster than a sedate lumber. This may have been because Gruff had been born with a twisted paw, but then again, perhaps he was just a big old lazy bear, which is what Stella really thought. She stood up from the bench. There was no point moping around worrying. Felix always said that if you were feeling a bit anxious or upset, the best solution was to get stuck straight into doing something useful and or fun. Preferably fun, of course, because fun things were much more effective at cheering up a person than a useful thing could ever be. Stella glanced over to where Felix stood on the terrace, examining the glass fairy globe the fairies had given him the day before. Fairies were terribly fond of Felix, so it made sense that his explorer's specialism should be fairyology. There were several fairies flitting about him now. Stella could see the sparkle of their wings from across the garden. Felix looked up and gave Stella a wave. She waved back, and then settled herself down in the snow to make a snow bear. She would have much preferred to make a snow unicorn, but they were a lot more difficult, and she had never managed to get one quite right. She put her gloved hand down, ready to scoop up her first snowball, when a crackle of blue sparks leaped from her fingertips. She froze. There before her was a perfect, sparkling snow unicorn. It was no more than 4 inches tall, but Stella could see each individual strand of hair in its flowing mane, the twists in its white horn, and even a collection of fine, feathered eyelashes. The unicorn's beautiful snow eyes gazed directly at Stella, as if it could really see her, as if it was waiting for her to say something. Stella gazed around in confusion. Had someone else come into the garden and made the unicorn? But there was nobody around except for Felix, and even he couldn't make snow animals as detailed and perfect as that. And surely it hadn't been there just moments ago. 1 minute she had wished for a unicorn made of snow, and the next second sparks had shot from her fingers and one had appeared. Almost like magic. But Stella couldn't do ice magic, not without her tiara, and that was miles away in a cabinet inside the Polar Bear Explorers Club. Slowly she reached out a hand towards the unicorn. As her fingertips got closer, she could have sworn that one of its ears twitched, just slightly. The sound of breaking glass made her jump, and she snatched back her hand. "Stella!" Felix shouted, and she was alarmed by the sound of panic in his voice. She turned to look over her shoulder and saw that he had dropped the glass fairy globe, which lay in sparkling fragments at his feet. Stella clapped both hands to her mouth in dismay. Fairy globes were 1 in a million, and Felix wasn't likely to come across one ever again. What could possibly have caused him to drop something so precious? "Stella, above you!"